Good morning, I'm Don Stern. I'm the Public Health Director for Richmond City Health District. You're in the Absent Father Wounds and Healing Seminar. If that's not what you intended to do, then go away. No. Appreciate your interest in this subject. I'm doing this along with Mike Flynn, who's the Executive Director of the Resource Guidance Services, Richmond, Virginia. And you also have a guest to help us out with this.
My buddy Will, and he's going to speak between us two, and he's going to share testimony of his own personal experience with the
subject. Okay. Mike and I are kind of teaming on this along with Will, and we have, I think, 45 minutes or an hour and 15 minutes. What's the?
Yeah, plenty of time.
Okay. And in that context, we hope to have an opportunity for some dialogue as well. So we're not going to try to dominate this with didactic material, though I think there's some valuable information here. I'm kind of setting the stage and talking about the issue of father absence from a community point of view. So kind of this is the kind of the overall look of how this impacts a community. And then Mike's going to talk and try to get to more of the heart issues of the subject of father absence. The city, and my focus is on Richmond City. That's my community. That's where I'm trying to address this issue. The principles here cross over any community. And I'll share with you where I think there are certain areas in Richmond City where I think it impacts more or less than other communities. But we have a human services plan in Richmond called the City Vision 2020. And in that plan, it addresses what are the drivers of the human health and human services costs. And those costs relate to all the public services that are necessary to support human needs in the community, which we can spend the next half hour talking about all of those. The report says, though, that the lack of father financial and emotional support is one of the major drivers to the health and human services costs in the city. And it concludes that a key ingredient to success in turning Richmond around will be the increased understanding and acceptance of personal responsibility by all of our citizens. Now, many will tell you that, well, it takes a village, which I think sometimes is a euphemism for it takes another government program. It takes restructuring the family to what we traditionally know the family to be. The plan also noted that it's unplanned pregnancies by teens and young adults, that it's domestic violence, abuse, and neglect, drugs and alcohol addiction, all contribute to the health and human services costs in our city. So what's the big deal about father absence? Why is that an issue? Children who are raised in father-absent homes are 5 times more likely to be poor. They're 2 to 3 times more likely to smoke cigarettes and abuse other substances, including alcohol and illegal drugs. 2 more times more likely to drop out of school. What do you think the dropout rate in Richmond City is? How many kids who start high school finish high school in Richmond City? About 50%. So that means half the kids that start high school never finish graduating from their high school. In the surrounding communities, I think it's probably 85%. Father-absent homes are 150% more likely to experience a non-marital teen pregnancy. 70% of juveniles in state institutions grew up in fatherless homes. 72% of adolescent murderers grew up without their fathers. Yet, with father's presence, children fare better academically. Children experience fewer behavioral problems. Children are less likely to engage in delinquent behavior. Girls experience increased sense of competency. Now, what is this about guys in the house and fathers in the house and girls? Thought that they have to be there for their boys. Now, it's pretty clear from the research that it's very important for fathers who are working in a cooperative relationship with the mother of their children really helps young women create sexual identity and competency in themselves. Ross Campbell's book, can't remember the title, child psychologist, talked about the importance of fathers in households, not for their sons, but the benefit of that for their daughters. Boys are more responsible men and fathers, especially African Americans. Fathers experience increased self-esteem, and these are all research findings that have been reported in Father Facts. What about public opinion of father's presence or absence? 96% of respondents in a national survey agreed that both parents should share equal role in caretaking of children. And 90% of Americans agree that fathers make a unique and irreplaceable contribution to their children's lives. So why is it that we have communities where fathers, in some cases, are largely absent? Let's take a look at what's going on in Richmond City. This is one community, and I'll share with you how this compares to the state. Well, let's just start here. We have a total of 6,000 pregnancies in Richmond City every year. Now, these are 2005 statistics, but it's pretty similar to the 2006, 2000 data, so it doesn't make that much difference. About 6,000 pregnancies every year, 3,000 live births. What happened to those other pregnancies? Right there. Sorry. No problem. Come on in.
Did I miss a lot?
No, we're just getting started. Yeah. Well, out of those 6,000 pregnancies every year, about half of them, 44%, are terminated by therapeutic abortion. Now, what does that say about what's going on in our community when there's this amount of sexual activity going on, results in a pregnancy, half of which women choose to terminate their pregnancies? You know, there's a lot. This is not a talk about abortion or therapeutic termination of pregnancies, but it does make me wonder what's really going on here. There's all this rhetoric about women and women's choices, but I wonder how many of these terminations are because the men say, "Come on, girl, we're not having this baby. I'm taking you to the clinic, and you're going to have an abortion." Or the father that says, "You're not having this baby. You're going to go get an abortion." Or, "I'm kicking you out of this house." You know, the boyfriend, the husband, the father who's really driving this issue. The rhetoric in America has made this look like a woman's choice issue, but I think a lot of it has to do with men's irresponsibility, first of all, for the sexual behavior. Secondly, for making sure that that woman is taken care of once she conceives. Fetal deaths is another one of the other results of pregnancies. And how many of those 6,000 pregnancies are non-marital? Well, 61%. That means 61% of the babies that are born in Richmond are born to women who are single at the time of delivery. Hanover County, Chesterfield County, Henrico County, the rest of the state, I'll just say the state, it runs between 30 to 33%. So that's still remarkable.
What's the abortion rate?
In the rest of the state, I don't know. I could take a pretty good guess. It's probably 15 to 20% of all pregnancies. Okay. Yes, right. You know, if we talk about just teen pregnancies, about half of those, 40 to 50%, will be terminated by abortion. Overall, it's about 15 to 20%. Okay. Yes. Yeah, if you look at these demographics wouldn't be much different in Norfolk, Petersburg, other cities in Virginia. Non-marital induced, you could imagine that most of the therapeutic terminations of pregnancy, those women are single, but 9% of them are married. Looking at this in more detail in Richmond, so that in 2005 there were 1,800 non-marital births. 61% that represents 61% of all live births. So think about it. You got these children who are being born to women who are single at the time of delivery. Father's gone, absent. Now, some would suggest, the research would suggest, about 20% of these men remain involved. I would suggest a lot of that is in my community, is to sell drugs and to have sex. And that involvement wanes over a period of time unless they get married. Now, some of those men do end up getting married, and that's our hope. Part of the work on this whole issue, that in this seminar, this conference, is to help men understand the value of their presence with their children, working in a cooperative relationship with the mother of their children. Most of the non-marital births are to women over age 19. There's this perception that non-marital births it's a teen pregnancy problem. Most of them in my community, and I can tell you statewide, about 75% of non-marital births are to women who are over age 19. Most in my community, non-marital births are to black mothers. Now, 60% of the population in Richmond is African American. And I'm not making a racial statement here. I'm sharing with you the demographics of our city and what the Center for Vital Records and Health Statistics reports out as birth outcomes in our community. So these numbers are high because my demographics are in that manner. So 60% of my population in Richmond City is African American. So you would expect most of them to be African American women. The black non-marital birth rate, though, is 2.5 times higher than that of white mothers. 83% in the African American community, 30% in the white community in Richmond. So in the African American community, 8 out of 10 babies born to African American women, the father is absent. This just shows the trends. We could go back to 1925 and you could see this gentle rise. 1925, it was about 10% out of wedlock births. And now we're up to 60% in the city. We're going to get to that. I'm getting there. Yes, sir. So I just have some graphic displays of this. If you want to look at it by age, I told you that most of these were to women over age of 20. There are teen pregnancies that are out of wedlock, but most are over the age of 20. Yes, sir.
I didn't know if you have the statistics, know it off the top of your head or showed it. For women 19 and under,
Yeah.
is the terminated pregnancy rate dramatically higher?
Yeah.
I noticed all the births are after age 18.
Oh, over 50%. It just jumped above 50% this past year. Our statistics for 2006.
So it's not like 70 or 80. It's not the
No.
majority of them. They're moving to a dramatic amount. It's just 51%.
Yeah, we have about 1,000 teen pregnancies in Richmond every year. So out of that 6,000 pregnancies, 1,000 of them are teenagers. Half of them will have a live birth. Half of them will abort their babies before they deliver. Again, just some graphic displays kind of shows the picture a little better. Again, remember this is Richmond City. It would look different for the state. If I were showing you the state, I'd show you that most of these out-of-wedlock births are to white women, not black women. Though the rate may be still higher in the African American community, most out-of-wedlock births in Virginia are to white women. So, a child born in Richmond City is very likely to be born to an unmarried mother who is 20 years of age and older. So, what do we know about the fathers? Where's Dad? There's been a lot of research on this issue for years, and I'm going to go back to 1991 with this research. It was a report called Beyond Rhetoric by the National Commission on Children. It noted that the increase in out-of-wedlock births, to answer your question, were related to a decline in opportunities for economic disadvantaged young men, that it's partly due to a growing social acceptance of premarital sexual activity and early unmarried childbearing, especially in low-income communities. It noted that there's a perception of limited opportunities for the future, that childbearing is one of the few achievements they can look forward to. So a lot of these young people, and as this becomes more of a generational issue, people are less likely to look forward to other life alternatives. So having a baby, even having a baby, being single, becomes normative in the community, becomes accepted, and that's the way it is.
Doesn't this correlate with drug usage too?
Yes.
The same three things, I would think.
Yes.
What have I got, what else have I got to do? And,
Well, if you come down to the bottom line, a lot of it has to do with hopelessness and a lack of sense that there's an alternative for the future. So if you don't have hope for yourself for the future, and you don't care about yourself, then what does it matter what you do to somebody else? Have sex with whoever you want, shoot whoever you want. We have 50 kids in our city get killed. Well, it's 10 kids a year, so the statistics for the last 5 years, 10 kids a year by other kids. Killed. So where there is this growing environment of hopelessness and lack of sense of future alternatives, and there's a lot of anger in our community too. And some would say it's because of the man, and certainly we have 400 years history in our community and in our nation about what has happened to the African American community. But in the last 40 years, John McWhorter, who wrote the book Winning the Race, would suggest a lot of it has to do with the anger that men have because their fathers left them, abandoned them at the time of conception. And that creates a void in men's hearts because their dad's not present. Public policy and workplace practices have kind of contributed to this as well. Talking to folks about what welfare has done to our community. Looking eye to eye, everybody I've talked to about this will tell you how much damage welfare has done to our community. And in John McWhorter's book I referenced earlier, African American man, PhD graduate from Stanford in linguistics, wrote this book called Winning the Race, 350 pages written by linguistic PhD, and you go, oh, wait, what did he say? It's one of those books you got to reread. On his chapter on welfare in the black community, his focus was on African American communities, and I've been diving in that literature because I'm trying to figure out what's going on in my community. He talks about how the man who thought he was doing so well, this is how he concluded his chapter, sent the black community to hell. His welfare created all these incentives for men to be separate, not to be directly involved. It's a public policy problem. Then this report to Congress on out-of-wedlock births. This was in 1995. Talked about the trends, the consequences, causes, and prevention. And talked about the use of family life education in our schools, improving educational and occupational options. Talked about the use of contraception, improving community awareness about the issue, use of the media, strengthening families. Now we're finally willing to talk about families, though there's still remarkable debate about this. Even in my work in Richmond City and talking to people at my level on this subject, well, what is the family? And I'm sitting there, what do you mean, what is a family? Well, family could be anything. And then finally, we're getting into this kind of back and forth, and finally the person I'm kind of arguing with, she says, well, my mother was single. And I'm thinking, so what? And I said, but what I said was, but the research shows that children who are raised in single-parent households are far much more at risk for poor outcomes, being raised in poverty, doing poor in school, becoming pregnant as teenagers, becoming involved in violence and crime, and more likely to graduate from corrections than college. Pregnancy resolution, I love this term. It's a euphemism for abortion. Child support services, public policy, a number of recommendations that came out of this report.
Does it include adoption in that resolution?
Yes,
So,
yes, adoption's in there. Yeah.
What are they saying on the child support item?
on the child support issue. I'd have to pull the report to be specific with you on exactly what they had to say. I guess I read this, 15 years ago? No, about 10 years ago. There's been a tremendous amount of work on the whole social services work around child support and how social services deals with families where you have children that may be eligible for foster care, so on and so forth. A tremendous amount of that work over the last couple of years has been this growing debate about how do you keep families intact versus separating kids from those households. And once you separate a kid from a household, then they become a ward of the state. 100% child support by the state. So there's a tremendous amount of work to try to figure out ways in order to keep children intact with their families. And most of what that work relates to is dealing with single women with children. Many of these strategies have left out the man.
That's one of the things. I mean, you feel like a checkbook when you're divorced.
Right.
And that the child support thing, that the woman can decide she wants an abortion, but if the man, I'm not in favor of abortion, but the man says, I want you to get an abortion, she says no, he still is responsible for this child. Right? He still has to pay child support.
Yeah.
He didn't want this baby. So it's another.
If he didn't want the baby, should he be getting,
Neither one of them should have. But they both had a responsibility in having that baby.
Right.
But she's able to get out of it and he can't.
Yeah.
And I think it's another place where fathers are not encouraged to be fathers. They're encouraged to be a checkbook.
Right, and if he doesn't write the check, then what happens?
Right. Right.
Now, doesn't that help? Isn't that
That helps.
that helps? Let's go on.
Facetiously.
Yeah. David Blankenhorn then wrote his book. I think this was in, I thought I had a date on here.
1996.
Okay, thank you.
That's what it says, a little tag.
Okay. Dave Blankenhorn did some research on father absence in America. And what was real interesting in this, he started by looking at men who didn't come back after World War II and what happened to those families. Now you realize that in World War II there were men who didn't come back because they were killed. There were also men who didn't come back because they chose to do something else. Guess which kids did worse? Who fared worse? Comparing those two. Those whose kids understood that their father abandoned them. This is a real interesting look at the issue of father absence in America over the last 50 years. He doesn't provide a whole lot of valuable suggestions, some public policy suggestions at the national level. Then in 1995, Virginia began the first governor-sanctioned statewide fatherhood campaign, recognizing that the issue is our paradigm had been frequently looking at single women with children and trying to bring resources to bear to help them and to try to stabilize that situation. We said, well, where's Dad? And let's try to figure out ways to get fathers back involved with families. And so we began in '95 the first governor-sanctioned statewide fatherhood campaign. Then in '97, people really started talking a little bit more serious about marriage and marriage promotion. And this became a hotly debated issue because it became politicized. It's like talking about marriage was what Republicans do, and it was, no, what does the research say? The research is very clear about how much better men are in marriage, how much better women are in marriage, and I can go through all the variables. There's this thought that women who abused women are abused by their husbands. Well, women are much more at risk in cohabitation when they're not married. They're more at risk for being abused by their boyfriends than they are by their husbands, so on and so forth. And the research is very clear that children fare better in a marriage relationship. Then by 1997, there were fatherhood campaigns in about 35 states. So this became a growing issue and interest in trying to address it. To the degree that in '98, then the Morehouse Institute had a seminar specifically looking at African American men at the Morehouse Institute in this seminar, which is a really fascinating read. I thought I knew it after being in public health for 25 years. Reading this report it helped me see that's really much broader issue. So what is it that we're trying to do in Richmond City? Do we want this? Do we want to build more jails, or do we really want to build human capital? This comes from a series of articles that was done by the Richmond Times-Dispatch on the city jails. But to me, it was a treatise on what's happening to our men in our community. The Urban League, National Urban League, just wrote its 30th annual report on the state of Black America. In that report, there's a series of seminars. And all those seminars are focusing on the African American man. The president of the National Urban League said the #1 social issue in America today is the condition of the black man. And I'm in Richmond City and I'm going, I think they're right. This is a major issue. Not that any of the issues that we're going to talk about today, father absence, is unique to African American men. Fellas, my black brothers stepped aside. White brothers, we got a problem here. 30% of our babies are being born to single women. And we have a lot of brothers who are out there asking their women to get abortions too and not taking care of their children. But in Richmond City, it just kind of, I'm concerned about ongoing talks about building more jails when I'm hoping that we can get to a point about talking about building human capital in our city. Well, that's kind of an overview of the issue. Again, a focus on Richmond, but this isn't unique to Richmond. We have the same issue in every one of your communities. So, Mike?
I think what we'll do is have all the questions for all three of us at the end. So we need to get Will mic'd up, Don?
Yeah.
We need to get him mic'd up so that we can take recordings.
Put that in your pocket. There you go. You just clip that right there.
Morning, gents. My name's Will Thornton. I'm a single father of a 16-year-old and a 4-year-old boy. I've been married twice. Both been involved with both boys since birth. My situation growing up, my father died when I was 4 years old, and so I grew up without my father. Within my family, I have there are 8 of us total. I'm the middle child, and I basically, from early adolescence, pretty much function as the father in my family. And that's part of, I look at part of that. I grew up in rural Gloucester County, so it's a completely different. I lived in Richmond since 1989, and the whole culture of family relationships and the role of fathers and men, especially within the family, is completely different from what I was raised with. And what I've noticed here in Richmond, that it's very acceptable. Things that I grew up thinking that were absolutely horrible, that should never happen, it's pretty much commonplace. And I know that I matter a lot in my children's lives. My boys have a sense of confidence that they get from me. That's something that their mother, although we don't get along together, although when we were first separated both times, it's like, all of a sudden I want to be super mom. That only, and it's very easy within that process to get frustrated. The system doesn't seem fair because sometimes I went seeking justice at first. You're not going to get justice if that's what you seek. But I do know that within the system or not, if you're an advocate for your kids, then you're going to have your time as a father. It's something that, it's one of the greatest joys in my life, and it's really been very fulfilling. It's something that I really wouldn't trade for the world. And I know that my boys, when they're raising my grandchildren, that's it's going to be a relationship that they can say, I'll cook you dinner, and they can tuck them in and say, I love you every night, and that's very important. And that's going to make I already see my kids, both of them are doing quite well. One goes to J.R. Tucker, and he's in a language program, plays basketball. And the other one, my 4-year-old, he's full of himself, but that's a good thing, because 4-year-olds should be full of themselves. They shouldn't be worrying about where's daddy or, things like that. It makes a huge difference from that. Any questions from that perspective, or wait till the end? Do the end? Okay, we're going to do it to the end. Okay.
Appreciate Will coming out. And,
Certainly.
he and I've talked about this a lot, and I thought his story was, he's an example of a guy who stepped up to the plate and did what I'm going to suggest that we all do. Will did it. Okay, time to stand up. This is more for my entertainment than it is yours, but repeat after me. Come on, Carl.
Come on, Carl.
Repeat after me. I am a man. I can change. If I have to. I guess. Thank you very much. Sounds like me. Yeah. Now, I stole that from the Red Green Show. Yeah, probably. If any of you ever read any of St. Augustine's literature, he talks about that there's a God-shaped vacuum inside of every man. And I believe that that's true. And I also believe there's a God-shaped vacuum inside of every kid, every child, boy or girl. I mean a father-shaped vacuum. And that every boy and girl must have a male role model in order to be whole and complete. You can hear on the radio, you can read on the internet some well-educated people who say that a woman can meet all of the child's needs and that they don't have to have a man in their life. And I'm seeing more and more stuff on the internet about that. It's hogwash, or as the pastor speaker downstairs said, crap. I don't usually say words like that in church, but it's been said, so I'm going to say it. That's crap. Boys and girls need mothers. Mothers cannot replace fathers and uncles and grandparents and good men in the community. They can be the best mom possible, but without the dad, it's a broken life experience for that child. And we're going to talk in a minute about the impact of that. But if anyone tries to sell you on that, because it's a seductive thought that, well, there's such a divorce rate and there are so many kids, maybe it's really not a big deal. Maybe Don's crunching numbers, but so what? Maybe it's not real. Well, it is real. And when you interview people later on who are raised, boys and girls that are raised without a dad are incomplete. I have a couple of friends who are elementary grade school teachers who are men. And they told me that I had read that in public schools, in elementary grades, boys are treated and thought of like broken girls. That's how boys are educated in our society at the elementary level, because it's female-dominated. So if you're a boy in elementary school in America, you're treated like a dysfunctional or broken girl. So I went to my two buddies who are elementary grade school teachers, and I said, is that true? And they said, absolutely. Not only is the male student treated that way, but the male teacher is treated that way. And I think that carries into the church as well, and that's another subject. But I think the church promotes that same idea. And so we can buy into that we're all broken and we're bad and we're dysfunctional, so let's let the women do it. And then we just step aside and let the women do it, and the consequences are all around us. And so, I'm not trying to wear you out, Will, but I appreciate Will coming and telling his story, because he's breaking the mold there. He's not going in that direction. In the Irish and Scottish tradition, there's a form of writing called triads, and they say things in threes. For example, there are three kinds of men who fail to understand women. Three kinds of men who fail to understand women. And that would be young men, old men, and middle-aged men. So in reading that, I decided to write one myself. and that is there are 3 wounds to the heart of a boy: an absent father, a grieving mother, and a lost childhood. So let's talk about lost childhood. You know, you can produce lost childhood in your kid if you're physically present or if you're physically absent. We can say a lot about dads who actually take off physically and go somewhere else or start a new family or just never come home. But then there's the dad who comes home every night. In my neighborhood, there was a family, and the dad was an alcoholic, and he came home every night and slept on the couch after he left the bar down on Midlothian Turnpike. But that's all he contributed to the family. He just came home and slept on the couch. And I know his adult-age sons today as young men, and they were greatly wounded by that. And quite frankly, when the wife finally said to him, "Are you going to be part of this family or not?" and he said, "Well, I plan to continue sleeping on the couch," and she finally kicked his lazy butt out, she was condemned by the church. She was criticized by the church for having kicked out a guy who had already left her. So you can be physically, a man can be physically present but totally absent and produce lost childhood. And lost childhood is exactly what Will talked about. He was 5 or 4, and in your case, your dad died, so that wasn't the same thing exactly, but Will had to become a man early. Will had to take charge. I experienced that as the child of divorce. I had to become a little adult. You know, the last thing you, by the way, please ever say to a kid whose dad has gone to the military or died or left the family, don't say, "Hey, now you're the man." That's in the list of don't say to kids, because they're not. And another man from the family or the community needs to step in and be the man, you know, surrogate dad if they're, or an uncle perhaps, but not the little kid. So you rob childhood from boys and girls when you don't have an intact family. If the one who's there, the single dad or the single mom, can be the best parent, single parent that you can be, and it's going to be a robbing of childhood for the kids. You know, you can be preoccupied, and one of the best sermons I ever heard was about this subject. My wife and I were at an adoption conference in California. We showed up, we were there Sunday morning. We said, well, let's find a church to go to. And we went to the funkiest looking church in a shopping center I've ever been in. And I thought, ooh, these people are, I'm Presbyterian, these people are waving their hands and scaring me. And we went in there and I heard the best sermon I've ever heard, and it was about this subject of being present when you're with your family, actually being tuned in and attentive and being there. And I'm actually intending to try to track the guy down and get a copy of the sermon. It was fabulous. So I deal with men who are addicted a lot, and not all the men I work with are addicted, but the guys who have addictions can be right there in the living room and at the table and not present, because their mind is not with the people that are around them. And there are lots of other conditions that men have that cause them to be an absent father, whether their body's in the house or not. But the results are woundedness, and in some ways, maybe, I haven't researched it, but maybe it's even more crazy-making if your dad shows up at night but he's not present than if he's gone, because at least you can kind of figure out that he's done the wrong thing and he's gone, but it makes you a little nuts if he's still around and he's not with you and he's not attentive. And what that does, by the way, is it teaches the daughter to marry a guy who does exactly the same thing as her husband. It almost guarantees it. And it teaches the boy to be like the dad, usually. So it perpetuates generation after generation. One of the things that I like to talk to men about is be rebellious. Rebel against all the pathological history that was handed down to you. Rebel against all the lies and traditions that don't work, that weren't right, and do something new, which is hopefully what you guys are doing who are in here. Another way that you can be an absent dad and be there is to marry a really dysfunctional woman. If you have sex before marriage, then you're most likely going to increase your chances of marrying somebody that you have a very incompatible relationship with. And if you find a woman who is severely emotionally dysfunctional and you have sex with her, you're more likely to marry her than if you just meet her at a picnic and then you're going to produce children who have lost childhood because they are not going to get nurtured by the most important woman in their life. So another way to mess up your kids and to produce pain and suffering in your kids is to get involved with someone that you wouldn't have gotten involved with if you hadn't gone to bed with her. And that's, people don't want to hear that, and people think that's very calculated and cold, but it's true. And when I do my counseling and I have people in a room with me who are in horrible marriages, and the combination between the man and the women doesn't make any sense at all, I'm going, why did these two people, they have nothing in common, no common interest, their values are different, they're hating each other, and life's hell on earth for them, and I get them in a meeting separate from one another, and I say to the man, if you had not had sex with this woman, would you have before you married her, would you have married her? Always they say no. So I'm seeing I'm not a researcher, but I can see a correlation there. I always tell people, God didn't say that sex outside of marriage is wrong because it feels good. He said it's wrong because it gets you into dysfunctional marriages. It brings people into the world who don't have an intact family. And so it's wrong for those reasons. I enjoyed the speaker this morning when he was talking about the issue of control and Paul being in prison. He didn't have control, and that was fascinating to think about being strapped to a guard 24 hours a day. What a horrible sense of lack of control that would be. You couldn't even go to sleep when you wanted to, most likely. And there's a lot of life that men run away from because they don't have control over it. But it's reality that you don't have control over everything. And we as men are kind of taught that we're supposed to fix and control everything, and when that doesn't happen, we tend to run away. And by the way, most of the rageaholics and angry men I've ever dealt with are men who are angry and rageful because their self-worth got tied to fixing and making things better. And when that's thwarted, they get rageful because self-worth is attacked. And we're not here to talk about how that starts, but I can tell you that boys get the idea that their self-worth is based on fixing things, in other words, performance-based acceptance. They get it from faulty parenting, from their dads giving them wrong messages about who they are and what their worth is. So they grow up and they marry a woman who has learned how to thwart his efforts to fix her, and he gets rageful because his self-worth is attacked. And so what does he do? He leaves, and he goes and finds somebody else to try to fix, who gets sick of it, and the same cycle occurs. Trying to control others is totally non-effective. You can't do it. If you think about it, when you take away all the time that you need to sleep, all the time you need to work, all the time you need to do self-care, life maintenance chores, there's a small number of hours in any given day that you have to interact with the significant others in your life. It's really, if you take that and look at it, it's quite interesting sometimes. And even on a week basis, as a man, as a husband of 34 years, and as a dad, I have very little time, and you will see that if you write this out for yourself, to interact with my kids and my grandson and my wife because of all the things you have to do to stay alive. And so it's not so awesome as we think it is sometimes to be attentive or present, because it's not 24/7. God doesn't ask you to be attentive to your kids and your wife 24/7 because you're not awake and you're not with them. Because I've never been retired, I don't know how that works. Maybe you're with them. Maybe you got to work harder then. But for most of us, I doubt that we're doing that. So we have to work hard, and then I'm going to talk in a minute about how that happens. But one more comment on rebelling. Rebellion is seen as always a negative thing, but rebelling is what Jesus Christ did. It's what the disciples did, and it's what we're called to do, is to rebel against the ways of the world, not to fit in because of who we are. And to be, if you're in Christ's army, you're not a civilian. You can't be a soldier and a civilian at the same time. And if you're a soldier, you have rules that other people don't have. And if you're a Christian, it's the same thing. When I'm counseling non-Christians, I don't know where the handles are. I mean, I'll always ask, do you have faith? Because if a guy doesn't have faith, he has no sense of higher authority. What am I going to work with? What am I going to say? Be a good boy? A non-Christian guy doesn't get that. So it all becomes about what is in his selfish interest. But if I got a Christian guy, even if he's a broken Christian and messed up Christian, I got some handles, the Word of God. It tells me and him what we need to be doing. So rebel against the old and get into the new is the message I like to tell people. In 1 Samuel chapter 17, David talks about the Lord delivering him from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear. And he said, you know, if God can deliver me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear, he can deliver me from this Philistine, Goliath. In fact, Goliath was a shoo-in. It was no big deal. Would you rather fight a big guy, ugly guy, or a bear? Right? Or a lion? And, you know, he actually knew what he was talking about. And I was thinking when I read that scripture, how did David know that? How did he have a frame of reference? Well, because he actually fought lions and bears protecting sheep. He actually did hand-to-hand combat and killed them. That's how he knew it. It wasn't a nice little thought or a proverb he read. He actually got in the game, got skin in the game. So and that's what I'm thinking is as dads, whether we had fathering, I did not have fathering. I had 3 stepfathers who were varying degrees of less than adequate. And I'm saying it that way because I'm in a good mood. So I didn't get fathered the way that you should, but I worked hard to father my kids, and I see my son, who, by the way, today is my first grandson's first birthday. And I'm headed out to Charlottesville as soon as we finish to go be a present grandfather. Because I thought, how awful would that be after this? Yeah. So I'm there, you know. And so I worked hard, and Will has worked hard, and some of you have worked hard to get it right as a father, even though we didn't get it handed down to us. But I'll tell you one thing that I did get handed down to me was role models in the community. There are kids watching you that you don't know about. There are boys and girls studying your life, and you don't even know it. The principal of the school I went to out in rural farmland, western New York, was a role model in my life, and I don't think he knew it. And I was a bit of a hellion when I was in his school, and I ended up in his office a lot as one of the few divorced kids in the 50s in that neighborhood. But I watched that guy's life, and when he was about 80 or 85, I decided I needed to write him a letter. Now, where I grew up, men don't hug each other. I don't know why, but I grew up in that part of New York State where men don't hug each other, and it's a very rare thing. And so I wrote this guy a letter when I was an adult with kids, and I said, thank you for being a role model, for teaching me how to be a man. I'm now a Christian family counselor. I've got 2 sons, blah, 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 and you had a large part in my life. Well, I went back up there for a visit, and guess what? I got a hug. And you just didn't get hugs in that community, I'm telling you. It's stark like that. So that guy appreciated being told, and I want to encourage you, if there was a coach or a Sunday school teacher or a neighbor or an uncle that influenced your life and you haven't thanked them and that guy's alive, you ought to thank them. And yeah. And if he's gone, thank his kids or his wife, because that encourages you to do the same, to be that same person in other kids' lives. And there are kids watching you, whether you think it or not. So step up to the plate, and God will deliver you from the hand of the lion and the bear. Now, what are those hand of the lion and the bear for us? Well, how do we protect, what evils do we protect our kids from? We have to protect them, for one thing, from pornography. We have to protect our kids from drugs and alcohol. We have to protect our kids from pornography. And by the way, Don, give me a high sign one. I want to save at least 15 minutes at least for us for Q&A. So, okay, so, okay, great. There's I think his name is Mike Monroe. He's a state policeman, Christian guy. I think he goes to Parkway Baptist or Swift Creek. His job in the state police is internet crime. And I met with him last year, and he said, every time you get in front of dads, I want you to tell them to be nosy and intrusive with MySpace and what are the other ones? Facebook and anything that kids are doing on the internet where they're telling their story. Be nosy and look at it and tell them you're looking at it. Now, see, I didn't know that because by the time all that came on, my kids were gone. So I'm telling you to tell other men, be nosy and intrusive in your kids' life and ask them who they're with and what they're doing and what they're putting out on the internet. So that's getting into the lion's hand and the bear's hand, because you get in trouble for that. Kids get mad. Sometimes wives might not understand. When we used to intervene with what videos our kids watched, some of our best friends let their kids watch things we didn't. And when I would intervene, it wouldn't be seen as a positive. It was seen as being an old fuddy-duddy, and people would criticize me behind my back. But you know what? I didn't really care because I was protecting the kids. Now, any good youth pastor will tell you that you can work as hard as you can as a dad, and your kids are going to see it anyway at the other people's houses when you're not there. And I know that's true. Youth pastors will tell you that's definitely going to happen. But you can at least teach the lesson in your home, it's not going to happen. And so that's one way to do it. And there's so many other ways. We could all give examples of how we need to fight the fight to protect our kids to the degree that we can. We can't totally. They're going to get in cars and drive. They're going to meet people who are going to influence them, and we don't always have control over that. And I know that, but we have to do the best we can to take on the lions and the bears of our day to protect our kids. And God will protect us in that process out of that faithfulness. Now, another thing that I read recently is a book called Uprising by Erwin McGinnis. And I think it's an awesome book. I'm really starting to pick up everything he's written. And he says that courage is what integrity looks like when we face the forces of darkness and evil. Courage is what integrity looks like when we face forces of darkness and evil. And let me tell you, pornography is the force of dark and evil. I think worse than drugs and alcohol by a lot. That's just my opinion. And it's much more addictive than drugs and alcohol, that I know. And so how do you get integrity so that you can have courage in the face of evil? He even goes on to say, if you don't have integrity, you cannot have courage. And how does a man strive to have integrity in order to be able to choose to live his life responsibly? How does a man accomplish responsible behavior and therefore have integrity, which is the ultimate gain to protect his children? Well, here's how I think it happens. I think we can sit in church 3 times a week and go to seminars like this every year or more and still miss out on getting integrity. And I think the way we get integrity is on a day-by-day lifestyle with accountability from other men, plus encouragement from other men. You can't have accountability and encouragement from another man unless you spend time with him and you tell him the truth and invite him to do the same. It won't happen. I've gone to church for 30 years with men that I've passed in the hallway, and I say, "How are you?" And they say, "I'm fine." And he says, "How are you?" And I say, "I'm fine." And we're both lying. We're lying before you go worship God in the hallway of the church because we don't spend time to know the truth about each other. And so I recommend that every man needs to have accountability and encouragement from 1 or 2 other men, not 40 men, 1 or 2 guys, where you tell the truth to each other and you've earned the right to do it, and it's a mutuality thing. It's back and forth. I'm telling you, I could tell you stories the rest of today about how that works. It does work, and there's really nothing to replace it. That'll make you a better dad and a better man. Come on up, guys. All right, what are your questions, comments, and corrections? We like all 3 of those. Take us on.
One of the things that I've found seems to make a difference in some of these discussions is the difference between reasons for why something happens and excuses.
Mm-hmm.
And so many times I try and talk about the reason something happened, and people say, "Oh, wow, there's no excuse for it."
Will knows the answer to that. Explanations are not excuses.
Yeah,
Right.
but if we don't figure out the reasons, if we don't talk about the reasons, separate from whether it's excusable or not, whether it excuses the action, then we don't figure out how to change it.
Well, I think that's a good point. It's hard to, personally, until you understand the reason, you really cannot change within that. But once you understand, and that's when the responsibility comes on. And one of the things that Mike was saying as a father, and growing up in the void that needs to be filled, it can only be filled by the Father. If you're not emotionally available, what he's talking about is being emotionally available for your children, not just for your children, for your, if you're married, for your wife, within the relationship of our group, being what he's talking about when we walk by the hallway and we say, how are you? Fine, fine. What he's talking about again is men being emotionally available for each other. this business that we have to be tough and we have to suck everything up and, you know, we have to do it a certain way. It's not, you know, we have emotional needs and we don't, as men, sometimes we don't realize that. I realize that, that's very important now. Before that, I didn't, you know, I was taught, you know, suck it up, you know, take care of it, fix it, and that's not a good, you know, that's not a good thing. It's not something that's going to develop you into the type of man that's going to be a good father, that's going to be, you know, a good husband, that's going to be, you know, a good friend.
I understand that right after Will knocks guys down on the rugby field and stumps them, he says, "How do you feeling, brother?"
You asked a question about reasons versus excuses. Okay, how many of us have said, "I'm that way because that's the way my dad was," or, you know, because he was an angry man, I'm an angry man, or my dad was an alcoholic, so that's why I have this alcoholic problem. Those may be reasons, but they should not be excuses, because as adult men, we have choices to make. And, I'll put this in the spiritual context, as new creatures in Christ, we're new creatures. We have an opportunity here to be different people. Don't be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind so that we may know His good, perfect, and pleasing will. So, my son-in-law makes excuses about his anger because that's the way, well, he says it's his wife, which is my daughter, makes him angry, and then he loses his temper. Well, I can understand how my daughter might make him angry, but it's not an excuse for then how he responds to her.
But if you don't discuss it with your daughter and say, look, every time you tell this guy he's a jerk and he's never going to amount to anything, he gets angry.
Right.
Maybe that's not what you should say.
Right.
You know,
Communication's a two-way.
There's no excuse for him belting you after you said that, but maybe we need to work on why he gets angry. You know, not that it's, you know, it's not that he should be doing it.
Right.
It's no excuse, but let's figure out some of these things.
Right.
Right?
Communication is a two-way issue. And, yeah.
Other questions?
Two comments to try to put it in one. I commend you, Will, on the role of children's life. And, as a twice divorced man, who doesn't believe in divorce, father of 5 children, you know, I hear a lot of talk on the media, etc., about why are, and maybe not necessarily this niche that we talked about here, Richmond City, Richmond, you know, poor men, but why are men not marrying as often and things like that, you know, going forward and not even having children? And there's tremendous fear, even in the highly educated class, and I know my experience has scared a lot of men from getting married in my peer group. I probably know 5 or 6 guys who just say, the child support system, the way it works in this country, for fathers who want to be responsible, you can still end up in jail. I haven't. But when you watch these shows on TV, Oprah and things, they list every other reason except men's fear of what can happen to them in this economy that no longer is salary-based. You can walk in with your W-2, you can go into court.
Do you have a question?
The question is there any, you know, agenda, and I think you pointed this out, Doctor, about, you know, men are in jail, they can't get out of jail, things like that are not paying child support, and they're never going to get out of jail because they can't pay their back bill. Is there any agenda, you know, going forward for men to make this system fair, where they don't end up in jail, or that they, you know, there's a remedial action, things like that? Because as we go into a service economy and you don't have a salary, you often can't get into court unless you can produce 3 years of financial records of every check you've ever written in your life.
I think there's a number of strategies that are being looked at in these regards. But let me first comment that we have to be careful about being what I call the mad dads group. That is, the mad dads who want the system to change because they're still bitter and angry with their ex-wives and they want to get back at their ex-wives. We as men ought to be contrite with that, and I sense that from you, I sense that from Will, that in regards to those broken relationships, and try to figure out how to make, we have a responsibility, again, as Christian men. It says in Romans chapter 12 that we're supposed to make peace, if it's up to us, as best we can, to make peace with all people. That includes our ex-wives. And then to take responsibility for our children. From a public policy point of view, there are a number of things that are going on, and I'll mention one in Virginia right now. It's a jail reentry project, or what I call community reentry. How do you help men who are leaving jail and corrections to reenter a community? Traditionally, what's happened? They send them out the door with what? Nothing. No money, no new friends, no job. So what happens to these guys? They come out, they get back into the same community, the same old friends who led them astray. I'll tell you what, guys, it's who you hang around with that's going to make a major difference in your life. It didn't stop when we were kids. It accounts to us as adults as well. But the community reentry or the jail reentry project is trying to look at ways in order to help these men bring some structure to their lives as they're coming out of jail, so that they could be job ready. So there's educational enhancements, job enhancements, and some graded steps to try to help them become independent and successful in the community. Will that make up for, the 20 years of chaos in their lives, the anger that's in their lives? The church community has a major role in here because folks need to come to know the Lord, ultimately. I had a question.
I'm sure Will will be happy to answer it.
How many men in the church do you think have used or have viewed pornography in the last week?
What percentage?
What percent?
30%.
I'd say 75%.
Well, Josh McDowell will tell you it's in between. The research that Josh McDowell has done, about 50%.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes, sir.
How many pastors would you say?
Yeah, probably. Yeah. This is a scary thing. I'd like to just reinforce what you had to say. 60% of the pornography, of the internet traffic, is pornography related. So you think about it. I don't know how many of you have gotten online. I'm not going to ask you. But I know a couple times when I've been online, something pops up and I go, whoa, sexy Russian women. I have a brother that lives in Russia, and somehow my email address they picked up on it. And they solicit, now I get the solicitation. Well, I'm doing what I think, did you say flee? You didn't say flee. There's a scriptural principle about fleeing. Yeah. So I went, whoa. I didn't go any step further. I went over to my Words document, wrote a letter to all my congressmen and said, whatever you could do to help this stuff from not coming into my house, I'm willing to relinquish some of my personal and private rights so this stuff isn't coming into my house, because I know if it's there in front of me, it's going to be in front of my kids. And this stuff is poison. You've heard testimony, anecdotes about it. The research is clear on it. Mike didn't have time to review all the research just on this one subject about pornography, but it's dangerous stuff, fellas. So we just really, I think that's an important point.
Let me just make one more comment. If that's not it, well, I know. Just hold it a second, though. I have to pass one thing on. If you're not struggling with pornography yourself, there are men and boys in your life that are. And so talk to them openly, straightforwardly, because no one else is. Okay, you're on.
I'm sorry. My nails are gone. I'm going to do a short. We're going to have to leave for lunch. What do you do? I guess to both y'all, maybe even Will. I have failed my son through my whole life, probably. And I have a woman problem. I cheated on my ex-wife, and nothing ever got right again. And so my wife took my family from me, and I hadn't seen him maybe in 5 years. She came back to Virginia from Washington, and my son said, Dad, I want to live with you. I took my son, raised him the best I could. I married a woman who, like you said, didn't have the problems, and thought I was doing a great job. Come a long way, been sober 20 years. And all of a sudden, I talked to my daughter, I'm mending with her, we're doing wonderful. And Kimmy my daughter said, Dad, I got something I gotta tell you. I don't wanna cry when I think about it. He said,
all right.
Gil said he hates your guts, and he basically wished you were dead.
Your son.
37 years old. And I never knew this. We've been to retreats together. We grew as Christians. Read the Bible. I've taught him to love the Lord with all his heart. And like I said, I'm an alcoholic. He saw a lot of bad things. Not proud of my past, but we healed. So we thought we healed. What I'm asking you is there ever a chance that I can, what can I do?
Have you said to,
Dad, one thing, he never gives me a chance to see the good side of me. See what I'm saying?
have you said to him what you just said to us about your relationship with your son?
Maybe not, maybe not.
You could start with that. You could offer to go to counseling with him, together with some pastor or some counselor that you all trust. Any other questions?
I want to know, I adopted a little son, he was 15 months, and I didn't know this stuff about father wounds and all that other kind of stuff, but we had talked when he was growing up that I would, when he got of age, when he wanted to meet his dad, that I would take him to meet his dad, but he was always kind of angry about dad. And then as he hit his adolescent years, I didn't really kind of know what was going on, but I know he also kind of got a little angry with me as well. And he said one day that he has problems with authority figures. I have 3 sons. Another 2 sons are fine, but he had a major problem, and I'm sensitive to stemming from his biological dad, who basically, whom he had never met and left him when he was a young child. And I'm just simply trying to wonder right now, as a dad, I've spoken to him, told him I love him, but seemingly he's kind of stuck with this whole, and angry with his father. Mm-hmm. Although I've been with him since he was 15 months, and he's now 20 years of age, but he's still kind of stuck.
Is he saved?
He's saved now.
He knows the Lord.
But yeah, he got saved when he got saved a couple times.
See, my belief, my view after counseling for 39 years, I added it up last night and I almost fell down when I realized it was 39. I thought it was 9, but he'll never get over that. Getting saved doesn't, like the pastor said downstairs, good Christians die of cancer and good Christians die of emotional wounds. He'll learn how to deal with life if he's willing to learn. He's willing to read and talk to you and talk to other people and do counseling if he wants to. But he'll never get over it or healed from it because it's a wound that is lifelong. And that's what we do, is we do lifelong wounds in our kids when we abandon them. Even if, by the grace of God, he ended up in a good family, he's a blessed guy, but he's still a wounded guy.
I have a question related to that. Could the son be having these feelings that why did his biological father abandon him for adoption, and he's dealing with that inside of him? That was just a question.
Well, yes, I think that's exactly what's going on.
Well, I think if I can just add something, basically, what Mike's saying is you only have one chance to get it right. Either you're there or you're not.
Right.
So the whole thing is you do the right thing, and if you don't do the right thing, you can't go back and fix it in any particular way, shape, or order. And you just have to deal with it from there, and both parties have to be willing to deal with it, I think is what it's...
Yeah, exactly. That's a point there. See, you can't make somebody else want to do their work. You can want to be a great adoptive dad and a great dad, but if the other people involved aren't able, ready, or willing, it's not going to happen. And it's hurtful. It's very hurtful, but it's reality.
Well, it seems to me, from my experience, is that forgiveness kind of encompasses the whole shebang. In both cases, your son needs to forgive. But forgiveness doesn't mean that everything is all right.
Yeah, well, forgiveness, that's another subject because it's so poorly understood. I don't want to even, yeah. Well, forgiveness and reconciliation are a whole different thing that needs to be talked about. Yeah. Yeah. Any other questions? And we got to go eat. That's important stuff.
We got 5 minutes.
We got 5 minutes. Okay.
One question is sort of the same thing. I was wondering, just for you, Doctor, about the research. I know a lot of the tendency with society as far as the the father, what I think we are is almost on the verge of a fatherless generation.
Yes.
And I think there's a societal tendency to say, oh, it's a black problem or it's a poor problem.
Right.
I'd like to see some statistical data that goes into like the richest county in the United States, and I don't think it's just that. I think if there was statistical data to prove it is a human condition problem that we're dealing with in America and worldwide, we bring some light to that. So
Yeah.
it wouldn't be so easy to toss it off in these little compartmentalized places because
Right.
we don't have to really deal with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I thought I qualified my presentation by noting that, this is Richmond City statistics, which are specific to one locality, but I did note that it's a nationwide issue as well as a statewide issue, and that we actually have more white out-of-wedlock births. We have actually more white teen pregnancies in Virginia than we do black. But people like to do that. They say, well, it's just a black problem, so that's part of the problem, is that, well, it's just a Richmond City problem, so we'll let Richmond City deal with it. Or it's a black community problem, we'll let it, or it's a poor person's problem, we'll let, or, it's a school problem, so the school will deal with it, or it's, and the schools blame the parents blame the schools. We got to see it as a community-wide problem and a societal problem. But
Well, it's kind of the condition of the political state of really a lot of other things.
well, political state, spiritual state, policy, you name it. You're right. It's very scary. But I bring this up because I could talk to you about STDs, teen pregnancy, heart disease, cancer, on and on and on about health outcomes in our community. But the one most serious demographic trend, I think, is this trend for children to be born in single-parent households, and in terms of its ultimate impact on our community.
You also have the whole, this is the whole gay community as well, and you can't say that this and that, it's kind of crazy. Well, I
Yes.
think it goes back to some of Mike's comments earlier, that the tendency of our society to accept this, to have unified schools, have a thing that the children are gonna come, a lot of them are not gonna have parents, it's okay, they're gonna be okay, we're gonna have an acceptance class, I believe it's right in there in both black and white communities. That
Right.
divorce is okay, kids being raised just by their mother is great, everything's fine, we're just gonna cope with it.
Well, thank
Yeah.
you all for being here. Did you have another question?
Just two more comments. One, my comments about father absence is not about blaming single women. We all know single women who've been very successful at raising their children by themselves, but the research is very clear that those kids do better when the father is involved. And you mentioned something about the amount of time, of focus time with kids in the household. I think our wives really do want us 24/7. They want all of our emotion, all of our time, all of our energy. But if you do what, like Mike said, just focus and give them some time with your kids and with your wives, things will work out well. Your wives will accept that.
Right.
Okay.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
All right, thank you guys for being here. How do we?
Well, I don't know.